Hi, everyone. Hoping you all are well, and thank you all for joining us for this wrap up discussion that we're going to have. Again, thank you to those of you who have been participating in the discussions, sharing your insights and your reflections on not only this topic, but a variety of topics over the years. So, what we're going to do now is have a wrap up of our discussion on this Kingdom of WHYDAH issue on the west coast of Africa and this bizarre historical confusion that has ensued for it's unclear exactly how long. We're going to revisit some observations and provide some considerations for frameworks for understanding what actually is the pivotal question, and that is, where is Jacob? Now, some have indicated that it's not necessary to know where Jacob happens to be, and this is based upon a grafting in theory. And sometimes when individuals believe in this grafting in theory, they then tell themselves that Jacob is obsolete. And this is a very interesting assertion because we are talking about Jacob's narrative and what is supposed to be Jacob's book. But you have individuals indicating that Jacob's children are no longer necessary or important. However, the book actually belongs to Jacob's children, wherever they may be found. And so let's get started with this discussion and analyses. And so before we get to some of the questions and issues related to this kingdom of WHYDAH on the west coast of Africa, we're just going to look at some preliminary dynamics that may have actually fueled some of the confusion related to the maps and the narratives related to this kingdom of WHYDAH on the west coast of Africa. And here you have an article from the Times of Israel indicating this important finding related to these Yiddisher black cantors from 100 years ago rediscovered thanks to a rare recording. And this is related to the history of collectives known as Black Jews in the United States. And before we go on, I want to point out something that is very, very important. It's very foundational. The question of where is Jacob is not a religious question. It's a relationship question. And so the question is about that Y haplogroup, in fact. It's about where are Jacob's children, Jacob's biological children. Having a religion does not make someone some man's child or some man's grandchild. And so that's the issue that we are grappling with here. Because there are a number of individuals around the world, in fact, who have taken on this sort of quasi-identity associated with Jacob. And there has not been a clear indication that these individuals all came from Jacob biologically, meaning aboriginal to Jacob. And many people have taken on this belief that they can take on a form of Jacob without actually biologically being Jacob. And so that might include things like wrapping the hair, covering the hair, dressing a particular way, speaking a particular language, eating a certain food. And so people are believing if they take on a particular culture or if they foster certain religious paradigms, that can be used in place of actually belonging to Jacob. And in law, we think of this in terms of these constructs known as substance versus form. And so when we ask the question, where is Jacob? We are talking about the substance of Jacob. We are not talking about having a form of Jacob, looking like what people might think Jacob would look like. We are talking about the essence of this man known as Jacob, with these children that appear to have disappeared from the face of the earth. And here you have another depiction that also served to fuel some of the confusion. And this is the Moorish Zionist temple of the Moorish Jews. This is also New York, and this is in the 1920s. And so again, we come back to the same dynamic, and that is, where is Jacob? And again, putting on a prayer cloth does not make you a child of Jacob. And again, it's important to keep in mind that we are not talking about religion. We are talking about ancestry. And so when we're talking about ancestry, we're talking about biology. And biologically, belonging to Jacob is not the same thing as believing in or practicing something that you believe Jacob practiced. It's about who are the children that belong to this man. Now, Jacob had a twin brother, according to the narrative, and there is plenty of evidence around the world of this manifestation of this twin brother. However, you don't see that much clarity with respect to this other brother known as Jacob. And we haven't gotten to this yet, but we are talking about a book that belonged to a particular family. It's like a family book. It's a family history. And that book, that family history, was represented to the world as belonging to everyone in the absence of this particular family. And so there has been an obscuring of the true reality and the foundation of the book and what would be known as the people of the book. And so what has happened is people believe they can simply pick up the form of whatever they think Jacob is and perform Jacob versus being Jacob. And I hope that's very clear. And so having an organization called the Moorish Zionist Temple of the Moorish Jews does not make anyone Jacob. Taking on the name Jew does not make anyone Jacob. Taking on the name Israel does not make anyone Jacob. Calling oneself Judah does not make one Jacob. The only thing that makes one Jacob is to be a son of a son of a son of a son of Jacob, or a daughter of a child of Jacob. And when we're talking about sons and daughters, we are talking about actual sons and daughters. And to be clear, before we go any further here, these organizations that came about in the 1920s, 1930s, they served a benefit to the communities. They served as a foundation of security. They served as a foundation for forming positive cultural and religious identities. However, they did not solidify simply by existing this descendancy in terms of ancestry from this man known as Jacob. And what it also did, even though you have these positive parts, is it set people up for taking on identities that did not possibly belong to them, even including individuals who may have belonged to the twin brother Esau, taking on these identities as Jacob, or individuals not even belonging in that particular family line, taking on this identity as Jacob. And so while it may have served one benefit, it created a problem in some other ways, because it also suggested to people that there was no need to really look for Jacob or to understand who was Jacob, because anyone, according to these paradigms, could serve as a form of Jacob, even without the substance. And you had many things that were taking place that would make it very difficult to refute the positivity of what was going on. And so in one instance, you had children attending schools that taught them Hebrew, gave them history lessons, provided them with religious training. All of that is very positive, particularly when you're talking about children who may be in less than positive environments. And then you have groups that were coming together to form religious organizations. However, even teaching the children Hebrew, creating the schools for the children, creating this Royal Order of Ethiopian Hebrews Incorporated, all of those things do not replace actually being Jacob's child. And to be clear, if people who are identifying as Jacob are actually reading the book that belongs to Jacob, what they see inside of the book, or what they should see inside of the book, is that there are dynamics in the book that are specifically related to Jacob's biological descendants. It doesn't say anything about grafting in descendants for certain passages. And so it's really talking about this entity known as Jacob and these children known as Jacob's children. And so this is very important to keep in mind and to not lose track of. And so it's important to keep these things in mind, because coming up with a Royal Order of Ethiopian Hebrews Incorporated is not going to overcome that need to have the substance of Jacob in addition to the form of Jacob. And so now this leads us to this discussion about the kingdom of Judah on the west coast of Africa and the confusion about this kingdom of Judah on the west coast of Africa. Now, clearly, when someone sees JUDA on the west coast of Africa, the first thing that most people are going to think of is Judah from the Bible. Now, this particular Judah, indeed, is supposed to be a variant of the original Hebrew of Judah. And so it's not the standard way of spelling Judah with the H. However, when you look at it, for all intents and purposes, it looks like Judah. And then when you see or WHYDAH, there's a bit of confusion there, because people are not going to automatically think that WHYDAH and Judah are supposed to be the exact same word and that they are serving as transliterations of each other. So there's a little bit of confusion right there. However, the thing that's going to stand out, of course, is the Judah, the kingdom of Judah that is sitting at the top. And this is particularly the case when you have something next to it called Dan Homi, and then you have a desert of Seth, as we've discussed before. And then on one map, there was even a Euphrates River. So there was a lot going on with this map and these similar maps to bring up a number of questions and raise all sorts of red flags for people to pay attention to with respect to this whole idea of the kingdom of Judah. What we're going to look at is what is really the history, as far as we have it, about this west coast of Africa and this kingdom of WHYDAH. And here you have an indication that there were scholars or individuals going back and forth about the significance of this kingdom of Judah on the west coast of Africa. And so there were mixed messages about what this kingdom was representing. And even when we did our research on this, what we found was that there were multiple names, or these multiple iterations, and there was the suggestion that these multiple iterations were really the same word, just in different languages. But what we see is there's something else that was going on. And you may also recall that when we were looking at this whole dynamic of this coronation, there were questions about this serpent worship dynamic that was going on in JUIDA, and the relationship of this to the kingdom or the people known as Judah. And so that question was actually put out there, and we examined that particular issue because it definitely served as a red flag. And now we're going to hopefully get to the heart of the matter with respect to the conservation of this Da that we've discussed over and over again with respect to all of these iterations of this kingdom on the west coast of Africa. So you have WHYDAH with the I, you have a JUDA, you have XWEDA, WHYDAH, WHYDAH, and JUIDA. And regardless of how you have it spelled, whatever the transliteration might happen to be, you have this conservation of Da, and this definitely stands out. And you even, as we mentioned, have the conservation of it in the word Dahomey. And so now we're going to look at what this Da is really all about and the significance of it. And so it is more important than simply finding Judah on the west coast of Africa, because that conservation of Da has a very specific meaning, and it also serves to challenge the entire idea of this being about a kingdom on the west coast of Africa that is actually the biblical kingdom of Judah. And so it suggests that something totally different was going on. And so what we find is that this Da conservation is purported to be coming from a deity on the west coast of Africa, a Yoruba faun deity known as Da. And what is indicated in encyclopedia.com is that Da served as one of the high-ranking Yoruba gods, known as the god of order, and also served as a god among the faun. And here you see that this deity known as Da was seen on par with Olorun. And Olorun, according to Yoruba tradition, is seen as exalted and exclusive in the same way as the God is in monotheistic religions. And so you also see the Olodumare as a part of this pantheon. And while there is this pantheon, you still have this idea of this particular deity being the supreme head. Now we're going to dig a little deeper into this, because what has happened is individuals who have identified that kingdom on the west coast of Africa as the kingdom of Judah in terms of the Bible, they've now identified themselves as being the people of that particular kingdom and identifying themselves by the names of that kingdom, those various names we've talked about. And so they may have identified themselves as the WHYDAH on the west coast of Africa, the JUDA on the west coast of Africa, the JUIDA on the west coast of Africa. But what you're going to see is that these names have nothing to do with the kingdom of Judah that is indicated in the Bible. And so what is JUIDA, WHYDAH, HWEDA, HWEDA all about? Those names are essentially the names indicating cosmic serpent worship. In other words, that is the name of the cosmic serpent. And so what you have when you have the WHYDAH kingdom, you have the kingdom of the cosmic serpent. And so you can see how this varies significantly from what individuals might have been thinking about the kingdom of Judah on the west coast of Africa. Now, there are some historical controversies about this because you have some historians saying that when they visited that area earlier in the 1700s, there was no serpent worship. And then they go on to say that this serpent worship appeared actually after this kingdom of JUIDA or Judah disappeared. And so that is something to still keep in mind. However, you still have this dynamic of a religious assertion about this word WHYDAH or XWEDA or HWEDA. Even AIDA, HWEDA, which is what the cosmic serpent's name is associated with, it has quite a bit of history. And so there is something connecting this WHYDAH, XWEDA, HWEDA to this construct of cosmic serpent worship. And so if you want to get a better understanding of the entire serpent cult at WHYDAH dynamic, you can check out this reading here. It's Sacred Texts, Chapter 2, Serpent Cult at WHYDAH. There's also a master's thesis that touches on this topic, and this is the information here for that master's thesis. And you can see here that this sacred serpent worship referred to AIDA or Aido, HWEDA or HWEDA, known as the cosmic serpent. And here you see various spellings related to the deity known as Da. And you also see the variant that includes Dan. And so you can see how all of this has created significant confusion about exactly what was going on the west coast of Africa. And it's still not clear that we have clarity about what was going on the west coast of Africa, because there are still questions about some of the unusual dynamics that took place at Dahomey when the kingdom of WHYDAH was conquered. There were some very unusual dynamics, and we've discussed those before, with the enslavement of those people and some other instances of brutality and genocide that took place in this particular instance. And so those things appeared to go beyond the slave trade and appeared to be about something else. And so another thing that you see here is that there is a bit of syncretism going on. And you even have this attributing deity status to the cosmic serpent, and then in some instances conflating the cosmic serpent and dynamics related to the cosmic serpent with St. Patrick or Moses of the Bible. And here you have additional information, Oxford reference, if you want to check it out. And you can see that word HWEDA, which is essentially WHYDAH. And you see additional information about HWEDA actually being the cosmic serpent. And as you can see, it's associated with rainbows and also understood as being a creative force, so a creator God dynamic. One interesting thing came up when analyzing this entire WHYDAH dynamic is that a Navajo Bible translation came up with a prophecy entry, and it contained the word HWEDA. And so when looking at it, it was impossible to translate, but it actually had the passages that were being referenced with this particular prophecy. And so it was possible to then go to the English version of this particular Bible passage to see what it was talking about. And interestingly, it is a Bible passage related to the identity and the state of Jacob. And it's Isaiah, and you can look in the 13th chapter through the 14th chapter. And as you can see here, unless you understand this language, it's impossible to do a direct translation, and it does not translate in Google Translate. That's another interesting dynamic with respect to the Indian languages in the Americas. There seems to be no ready translation to go from the Indian languages into the various other languages, or from the various other languages into the Indian languages. You also see this with Africa, by the way. And so there are very few languages that you can actually do these direct translations with. But as you can see, this was coming up because of this HWEDA insertion in Isaiah 13:16 in this instance. We'll look at a couple of other ones, but then I'll just leave you with the scriptures, and you can look up the scriptures in English for yourself or whatever language you are speaking. And here you see some additional entries with WHYDAH. And an additional entry with JUIDA. Now, in looking up these passages in Isaiah, it was noted that this is a prophecy against Babylon. As we wrap up this current discussion and analysis related to the history of the west coast of Africa and the kingdom of WHYDAH and the kingdom of Dahomey and the surrounding kingdoms, hopefully you have a little bit more clarity about what exactly was going on over there, what was the history, who were the people, and in fact, who are the people in the Americas in relation to who the people were on the west coast of Africa. There is still one question remaining, and this question becomes even more prominent now that we do not have a clear understanding of this west coast of Africa situation. And that question is, where is Jacob? Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.